Jeffrey Epstein, a man who sadly needs no introduction, famous for associating with billionaires, CEOs, and presidents, and not to mention also being a complete monster. But the thing almost as infamous as Jeffrey Epstein are his properties. An isolated private island, a sprawling 10,000-acre ranch, a $50 million Manhattan townhouse, and that's just the beginning. Born in 1953, Epstein went from a Dalton school teacher to a rising star in finance, charming the ultra-wealthy and traveling the globe as a high-level consultant. He built connections with billionaires, foreign clients, and even, allegedly, intelligence agencies. By the late 80s, he was managing the fortune of Les Wexner, gaining unprecedented access and control. How he made his billions, or if he really did, is still unclear. What is clear is that Epstein's properties were more than just homes. They were stages for some of the darkest acts imaginable. So, let's take a step into the estates of Jeffrey Epstein. Zorro Ranch. Deep within the secluded high desert plains of Santa Fe County, New Mexico, lies a sprawling property, a remote 10,000-acre estate, known for decades before as the Zorro Ranch. Located near Stanley, approximately 30 miles southeast of Santa Fe, this ranch served as Jeffrey Epstein's isolated operational headquarters in the western United States, engineered for maximum concealment and control, and the sheer scale and the remoteness of the ranch matching its infamous reputation. Epstein acquired the Zorro Ranch in 1993 from the former Democratic governor of New Mexico, Bruce King. The original purchase price for the vast property was around $12 million, in line with his deliberate strategy for asset protection and obfuscation. The purchase was initially overseen by a New York trust called the Zorro Trust, with Epstein signing as the trustee. Control was later centralized when the property was transferred to Cypress Inc., a corporation registered in the U.S. Virgin Islands. This basically meant that the property's legal title was actually held by an offshore company, so the control was entirely in Epstein's hands, and any future legal action from the mainland states would have to jump through many hoops. At the time of Epstein's death, the shares of Cypress Inc., which held the title to 49 Zorro Ranch Road, were valued at approximately $17 million. The Zorro Ranch was far more than a simple luxury home. It was a self-sufficient compound specifically engineered for seclusion. Central to the estate was a massive hacienda-style residence spanning over 26,000 square feet, including a huge courtyard, and also featured a living room so huge it was roughly the size of an average American home. The ranch infrastructure provided the necessary isolation for unlogged and untracked movements. An isolation like this isn't accidental. It's the kind of infrastructure that prevents oversight and enables crimes to remain invisible. The property included its own private airstrip, along with a hangar and a helipad. Separate, auxiliary structures ensured the compound could function autonomously, encompassing guest houses, offices, a log cabin, and even a fire station, along with a 7-bay heated garage. Although Epstein was never officially charged with crimes in the state of New Mexico, the ranch became inextricably linked to the network of The state's attorney general's office confirmed in 2019 that it was investigating allegations and had interviewed possible victims who had visited the ranch south of Santa Fe. Virginia Giuffre, a key witness against the broader criminal network, claimed that she experienced there from Epstein and his associates. Local reporting also raised questions about how the property operated day to day. The ranch was managed by a couple from New Zealand, Karen and Bryce Gordon, and former employees and local accountants alleged that large parties were hosted on the property several times a year and that the women were recruited to attend. These claims were never tested in court, but they contributed to the ranch's growing reputation as more than a private residence. A number of prominent individuals were also reported to have visited the isolated property. Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson acknowledged knowing Epstein, and Prince Andrew, a close associate of Epstein, was reported to have stayed at the ranch for several days in 2001. Other reported visitors have been named in various accounts, though the extent of their involvement remains disputed. Most disturbing were revelations regarding Epstein's intentions for the isolated desert facility. He was reported to have planned to deliberately exploit the ranch's remoteness to conduct eugenics experiments. Epstein intended to, quote, seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating women at his New Mexico ranch. He explicitly planned to use the ranch as a baby ranch. The ranch's isolation was further reinforced by Epstein's control of surrounding land. For decades, his company held grazing leases on roughly 1,200 acres of adjacent New Mexico State Trust land, effectively buffering the estate from public access. After Epstein's death in 2019, the New Mexico State Land Office launched an investigation into those leases. State Land Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard ordered staff to review hundreds of pages of documents, citing concerns that the land had been used to shield the property rather than for legitimate agricultural purposes. In a subsequent cancellation notice sent to Cypress Inc., Commissioner Richard cited three main violations: the obstruction of staff seeking access to inspect the state trust land, a written misrepresentation by Cypress Inc. on lease compliance, and the conclusion that they may have obtained the leases through illegitimate means for purposes other than ranching or agriculture. The commissioner publicly asserted that it was no doubt used to protect the privacy of Epstein and his co-conspirators. In the end, they terminated the leases, and the commissioner proposed converting parts of the state land into a recreational area or installing a memorial to survivors of assault and other related crimes. There was another small legal complication. A Florida-based nonprofit church called Love and Bliss filed a deed claiming to have purchased parts of the land for just $200. Daniel Weiner, attorney for the Epstein estate, noted that this group was the same one that had previously filed a fraudulent deed concerning his Florida estate. After remaining largely unused following Epstein's death, the Zorro Ranch was listed for sale to liquidate the estate's assets to pay victims and creditors. The ranch was initially listed for $27.5 million, but was later dropped to $18 million. In August of 2023, the property was sold for an undisclosed sum to San Rafael Ranch LLC, who immediately renamed it to Rancho de San Rafael. The proceeds from the sale were directed towards managing the estate and paying off creditors. Recently, in late 2025, New Mexico legislators proposed the creation of a $2.5 million Truth Commission to probe activity at the Zorro Ranch and determine what they actually know, and are seeking state house approval in January. This was driven by a determination among lawmakers like Democratic State Representative Andrea Romer that there's no complete record of what occurred, and that the state must ensure that trafficking crimes essentially never happens again. The state attorney general Raul Torres already initiated an investigation into financial businesses used by Epstein, reaching agreements with two banks to dedicate $17 million towards preventing human. And what I think is super crazy is that you can just find the ranch on realtor.com and scroll through all the pictures, and knowing what happened there is just so creepy, and seeing the inside, it's just such a unique vibe. Like it's unexplainable, but you can just tell that something evil happened here, and you can see the big circle or the crosshairs in this garden area. I mean, it is just a very eerie place. I mean, obviously an insane property, but just look how isolated it is and in the middle of nowhere. And just imagine being a victim here and looking out and realizing you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no escape for you. I mean, a very just terrifying thought. Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. In the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side stands the Herbert N. Strauss House, a limestone monument that once served as the urban command center for Jeffrey Epstein's global operation. This 9-story townhouse, situated between 5th and Madison Avenues, is regarded as one of the largest private residences in the entire city. Horace Trumbauer, a famous American architect who designed much of Duke University's campus, also designed this house and completed it in 1932 for an heir to the Macy's department store fortune. The Strauss family, however, never lived there due to the high cost of property taxes. So for decades, the building housed the Birch Wathen School before it was purchased in 1989 for more than $13 million by billionaire Les Wexner, who initiated a massive renovation led by architect Thierry Despont, who was previously an associate architect for the restoration of the Statue of Liberty, and an interior designer for John Stephanus. Jeffrey Epstein moved into the residence around 1995, though the official legal mechanics of his ownership were intentionally obscured for many years. While Epstein claimed to own the home shortly after moving in, the recorded legal title did not reflect this until December 23, 2011. At the time, the property was formally conveyed from the 9 East 71st Street Corporation to Maple Inc., another shell corporation registered in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Rumors circulated for years that Wexner had sold the estate to his protege for as little as $1 million, though other reports suggested a transfer value of $20 million. Again, as it was held by an offshore company, legal action from the mainland government would be severely hindered. To those few invited past its massive 15-foot high oak doors, the interior was described as a high-walled, imperious, private Xanadu that seemed to have no boundaries. The entrance hall was famously decorated with rows of individually framed prosthetic eyeballs, which Epstein told guests were manufactured in England for injured soldiers. Beside these sat a twice life-size sculpture of a naked African warrior. Guests were frequently invited to tea in the leather room, which featured cordovan-colored fabric walls and leopard print chairs. Epstein's massive office spanned the entire width of the house and was furnished with a gilded desk that once belonged to J.P. Morgan, the famous Wall Street banker. Atop a Steinway grand piano sat a stuffed black poodle, which Epstein used to prompt visitors to think about, quote, what it means to stuff a dog. And that is just so odd. And perhaps most disturbingly, he had a copy of Marquise de Sade's Justine, a novel that describes the suffered girl. And between the dog, to the book, to the eyeballs, to the African warrior, I mean, he had a very unique taste of decorations. The property was as much of a fortress as a home, featuring a lead-lined bathroom hidden beneath a stairway, equipped with its own telephone and closed-circuit television screens. Outside, the building had an extravagant heated sidewalk, so they wouldn't have to suffer stepping in snow. The total living space was approximately 51,000 square feet, significantly larger than any of the neighbors. The 2008 property tax bill for the residence was the 4th highest for a single residence in all of New York City. Despite its architectural beauty, the building was later dubbed the House of Horrors. Why should be obvious. It was owned by Jeffrey Epstein, after all. The federal indictment of 2019 explicitly identified the mansion, the New York residence, a primary site for the exploitation and of girls from at least 2002 to 2005. Epstein used the townhouse to entice and recruit victims, often under the guise of modeling opportunities or providing massages. At these encounters, he would give victims hundreds of dollars in cash. One victim, Virginia Giuffre, alleged in court papers that she was forced into acts with Epstein's associates, including Prince Andrew, within the mansion. Another lawsuit brought by a Jane Doe alleged that Epstein held parties at the residence as early as 1994, where she was R-worded at the age of just 13. Witnesses claimed that the woman at these gatherings often seemed foreign, appeared model-like, and frequently outnumbered the men. The mansion was allegedly a hub for Epstein's elite social circles, which was reported to include politicians, celebrities, and even academics. Notable figures allegedly connected to visits or associations with the 71st Street address include Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and various other billionaires such as Leon Black. Reports have alleged that the house was extensively wired with a video surveillance system, and some visitors allegedly suspected that they were being recorded as a form of insurance blackmail. Artist Maria Farmer, who reportedly worked for Epstein in 1996, alleged that she saw a hidden media room where men monitored pinhole cameras located in bedrooms and bathrooms throughout the house. The fall of the Upper East Side Fortress began on July 6, 2019, when FBI agents and NYPD Crimes Against Children Task Force executed a raid on the property. Agents were forced to break down the door to gain entry. Inside of a locked safe, investigators discovered a trove of evidence, including thousands of suggestive photographs of or partially females, some of whom were allegedly confirmed to be. They allegedly also found compact discs with handwritten labels such as young name plus name and girl pics, along with $70,000 in cash, 48 diamonds, and a fraudulent Austrian passport that Epstein had used in the 1990s. Following his death, the mansion also became a primary asset for liquidation to satisfy creditor and victim claims. Though it was once valued at $77 million by federal prosecutors and initially listed for $88 million, the property's extreme criminal association and the impact of the pandemic dropped its value significantly. In March 2021, the mansion was sold for $51 million to Michael Daffy, a former Goldman Sachs executive. The sale proceeds were directed to the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, which had already paid out tens of millions of dollars to over 100 claimants. The new owner immediately announced plans for a complete makeover of the house to purge it of its tainted history, a renovation that was reportedly completed by 2025. And while the physical structure remains, the sale and subsequent gutting of the interior represented the final dissolution of Epstein's most visible seat of power in New York. Little St. James. In the turquoise expanse of the Caribbean, 2 miles off the coast of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, sits a 70-acre private outcrop that would become the geographic center of one of the most infamous international criminal investigations ever, known officially as Little St. James and colloquially by locals as Island or Island. And I'm sorry I had to censor both of those words, but it's safe to say that this island was not associated with anything good. And this secluded paradise, quote, paradise, served as the primary residence and operational headquarters from 1998 until his death in 2019. And to the outside world, it appeared as a regular ultra-luxury retreat for the ultra-wealthy. But the island itself was meticulously engineered for Epstein's sadistic purposes. The transformation of Little St. James into a private fortress began in April 1998. Epstein purchased the island from venture capitalist Arch Kumin for a reported $8 million. However, the island was not held in his name. Instead, the legal title was vested in a U.S. Virgin Islands corporation he controlled, Nautilus Inc. In the probate petition he filed after his death, the 10,000 shares of the corporation were valued at a staggering $63 million. This strategy extended to the nearby Great St. James Island, which he also owned. That was owned by yet another entity, Poplar Inc., and was valued at $22 million. This was obviously deliberate. By establishing all of these corporations in the Virgin Islands, Epstein leveraged the territory's status as a tax haven that still remained in the U.S. banking system. This allowed his companies to pay an effective tax rate of just 4%, saving him an estimated $300 million over 2 decades. Once again, legal action would be very complicated as they would have to go through the Virgin Islands court system. I mean, this was all obviously on purpose. Epstein didn't just live on Little St. James. He engineered it to be a self-contained, sovereign mini-country. He commissioned Edward Tuttle, the architect behind renowned hotels all over the world, to design and renovate the main residential compound. The resulting estate was massive, requiring a full-time staff of 70 people by 2008. The compound had an array of ultra-luxury amenities, including a helipad and private dock to facilitate the unlocked movement of his private fleet, 4 luxury guest villas, and 2 swimming pools, a dedicated gas station and high-capacity water filtration system, and a stone-walled cabana with a distinctive turquoise ceiling. Epstein's personal residence. In 2005, he even went so far as to hire the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority to install a combination power and fiber optic cable running underwater from St. Thomas. This provided the island with high-speed data and its own electric connection, removing the need for noisy generators and further insulating his communications from local eavesdropping. The most famous and scrutinized structure on the island is, of course, the blue-striped, box-like building located at the southwest point, often referred to as the Temple. Surrounded by an expansive pavilion with mosaics painted in red on a white background, the building's purpose has been a subject of intense speculation. Originally, the structure was topped with a golden dome and statues of bird-like figures, though the dome was reportedly blown away during Hurricane Maria in 2017. The physical structure as built deviated significantly from the plans submitted to the government. While architects initially applied for a music pavilion or a container for a grand piano, the finished building was a much taller cube constructed with new materials. Patrick Barron, a piano tuner who visited the site twice in 2012, described a surreal interior. He found a single, large room with wooden floors and an oriental rug, containing a dark wood desk 10 feet long and floor-to-ceiling bookcases. Most oddly, Barron noted that there was a portrait of Epstein and the Pope hanging on the wall above a small black grand piano. The building also featured a false wooden door painted onto the exterior, hinting at hidden rooms. Although my personal theory is that this was just his kind of private office, because he seemed to love these extravagant and big offices where he worked. I mean, in his New York Manhattan home, he had a huge office. Here, he has a big office. And also in the Zorro Ranch, he had a huge office. So it doesn't seem out of the question if he really just wanted a extravagant place to work, but could there be darker meaning behind it? For sure. The U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit later characterized Little Saint as an instrumentality of crimes. Prosecutors and survivors alleged the island was the destination for the Lolita Express, Epstein's customized Boeing 727. Flight manifests from 1997 to 2005 reveal that numerous girls were flown to the island from locations including Brazil, South America, and Europe. Once on the islands, victims were reportedly held captive in a state of absolute isolation. Virginia Giuffre testified that she and other underage girls were allegedly forced into intimate acts with Epstein and his high-profile guests. The recruitment was overseen by Ghislaine Maxwell, who taught victims to be subservient and give Jeffrey what he wants. Attempts to escape the island were extremely dangerous. One survivor recounted stealing a quad bike and attempting to swim across the channel to St. Thomas, only to be caught by security before even reaching the coast. And I mean, we have a recurring theme with at least 2 of his properties here. Very isolated and very hard to escape from. Epstein used the luxury of Little St. James to host an elite circle of guests, including politicians, scientists, and royalty. High-profile figures such as Prince Andrew and Jess Staley, the former head of Barclays, reportedly visited at least a few times. According to allegations from journalists, former associates, and victims, some visits to the island may not have been merely social, but potentially part of a broader unproven scheme. Ghislaine Maxwell was reportedly said to have told an associate that the island was allegedly outfitted with extensive video surveillance, which she described as an insurance policy. Multiple sources have alleged that Epstein may have recorded influential visitors in private moments, potentially to gain leverage, though no verified evidence of a systemic blackmail operation has ever been made public. After Epstein's death in 2019, the FBI reportedly conducted searches of the island, removing boxes of electronic media and other materials that could have included recordings, but the contents of which remain undisclosed. In January 2016, Epstein expanded his assets by purchasing the neighboring, larger island of Great St. James, spanning approximately 165 acres. The island was acquired for $22.5 million through Great St. Jim LLC, another shell company in the Virgin Islands. Epstein used a lot of deception to hide his involvement in this purchase, including making another individual the ultimate beneficial owner, against their will to bypass local opposition. Islanders had previously begged the former owner not to sell to Epstein due to his criminal history. Investigations suggest that this purchase was a strategic effort to shield his activities on Little St. James from view by controlling the surrounding perimeter and blocking public access to the Christmas Cove, a popular attraction. Just 2 days before his S-word, Epstein signed a new will that transferred his entire estate into the 1953 trust. This was widely viewed by legal experts as a final attempt to hide the identity of his beneficiaries from his victims and creditors. However, the obvious sham transaction was defeated in court. Under a $105 million settlement reached with the Virgin Islands government, half of the proceeds from the sale were marked to fund support services and counseling for survivors of human and Great St. James. Just a quarter mile off the coast of St. Thomas lies an expansive land that was meant to be the final expansion of a dark empire. Great St. James, a 165-acre private island, stands as a larger, more rugged neighbor to its infamous little brother. For years, it was a place of local recreation, centered around the popular snorkeling and mooring spot known as Christmas Cove. But in 2016, Epstein set his eyes on it, and he had to have it. Like we talked about before, there was strong opposition and had to make Sultan Ahmed bin Salman the actual owner before buying it from him in parcels. One of his first moves after the purchase was to shut down Christmas Cove, effectively ending the public's ability to anchor near his primary base. Once in control, Epstein's development plans for Great St. James were as extravagant as they were confusing. Permit applications and documents revealed a vision for a self-sufficient compound that included a private road network and a dedicated barge dock, 2 primary homes, several cottages, and a security building, a solar array, and generator system connected via a marine electrical cable, and most curiously, plans for an underwater office and pool and a large amphitheater. And the plans for the underwater office kind of gives more credit to my earlier theory. I feel like Epstein just loved his extravagant offices for whatever reason. But despite these grand ambitions, by the time of his death in 2019, Epstein had not completed any major construction on the island. Instead, it became a battlefield for a variety of environmental and regulatory disputes. Epstein repeatedly had conflicts with the Virgin Islands Department of Planning and Natural Resources, and within 3 months of the purchase, construction activity was detected, leading to a series of legal clashes. First, permit violations, Epstein was ordered a cease and desist after clearing land without a permit and was initially fined $280,000, later reduced to $70,000. His activities drew the attention of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, who visited the island to assess damage to the protected areas. Concerns were raised about the habitat of the Virgin Islands' native tree boa and the health of endangered corals near the shoreline. On December 21, 2018, Coastal Zone Management issued a stop work order, but Epstein was later accused of expanding a driveway and failing to remove an unpermitted beach bar cabana in direct violation of that order. In an obvious attempt to circumvent government pressure, Epstein sent $320,000 in checks through his foundations to the St. Thomas Historical Trust. However, the trust president later stated that the donations were part of a misunderstood or fraudulent agreement, and of August 2019, the trust was awaiting the results of an FBI investigation into the funds. In May 2023, both islands were sold for $60 million to billionaire financier Stefan Dekoff, a steep 52% discount from the original asking price. Dekoff has since announced plans to transform the site into a world-class resort. Epstein's Palm Beach Mansion. A 14,000 square foot, 6-bedroom house in Palm Beach, Florida, was one of Epstein's first ever properties, which he bought in 1990, one of his cheapest properties of the bunch, yet still insanely expensive, at around $2.5 million. This house was the home to a majority of the horrors that took place across his properties, where several told investigators that they were being assaulted at the Palm Beach Mansion, along with his homes in New York, Mexico, and the islands. But this property was where Epstein would approach local college students, asking them if they wanted to work at his home, answering the phones. The Palm Beach Mansion was tied to several allegations of with several victim statements alleging that they were brought to Epstein's home in Palm Beach, Florida, while repeatedly returning to the property time and time again. Teenagers were paid and with several assaults and exploitations taking place at the property. The investigation that took place at the property resulted in Epstein's 2008 plea and sentencing proceedings in Palm Beach County Court. Eventually, when Epstein died in federal custody, the lot went for sale and was sold for an insane $18.5 million in March 2021. The month after, it was demolished completely, with the lot being sold for $25.8 million. The address was also changed so that all traces of Jeffrey Epstein finally were removed from the property completely. Paris apartment. In the heart of Paris's most exclusive residential district lies a limestone monument to power and secrecy. Situated near the Arc de Triomphe, this address hosted Jeffrey Epstein's principal European base, an expansive luxury complex that functioned as a transatlantic node of his global network. While the exterior exuded traditional Parisian elegance, the interior and the legal structure of the holding were engineered to create a shadowy world for Epstein. As usual, when Epstein acquired the property in 2002, it was not held in his personal name. Instead, the legal title was controlled by 999 shares of SCI JEP, a standard French property holding company designed for the management of real estate. The apartment was not a single flat, but a sprawling collection of 7 distinct units within the same building. According to a 2019 probate filed in the Virgin Islands, the complex comprised 3 units on the second floor, 2 on the 5th, and 2 in the cellars. The combined living area was approximately 9,000 square feet, though some say it is closer to 7,000. Nevertheless, this massive footprint in one of the world's most expensive real estate markets established Epstein as a permanent fixture in the moneyed world of Paris. To the few who saw its inner workings, the apartment was characterized as a site for both elite social networking and alleged criminal conduct. Epstein's Franco-Brazilian butler testified to French investigators that the residence contained a specially built massage room and that a great many women visited this room, although he noted that he was unable to determine if they were at the time. He also specifically mentioned high-profile figures as visitors to the Parisian pad. The residence provided the necessary privacy for Epstein to host these individuals while maintaining a low public profile, as he notoriously avoided eating in public restaurants, comparing the experience to, quote, eating on the subway. The Paris apartment was inextricably linked to Epstein's associate, Jean-Luc Brunel, the founder of Karen Models. Brunel, who was frequently a passenger on Epstein's private jet and visited him during his 2008 Florida incarceration, was accused in court documents of procuring for Epstein. French police searches in 2019 extended beyond Epstein's residence to include the offices of Karen Models. Brunel was later as a part of the French probe into R-word and eventually committing S-word in a Paris prison in 2022 while awaiting trial. The collapse of the Paris sanctuary began shortly after his death in a New York jail. French investigators responding to evidence found in the United States and allegations of occurring on French soil, executed an extremely intricate search of his property. The raid was an incredible 13 hours long, and it was part of an inquiry into half a dozen potential charges of R-word and involving both French and international victims. The presence of the specialized massage room in the butler's testimony formed a central part in the French authorities' attempt to map the European arm of Epstein's trafficking enterprise. As part of the mandatory liquidation of the Epstein estate, the apartment was brought to market in 2022, originally listed for approximately $12 million. It was sold for just $10.4 million to Bulgarian plastics tycoon Georgy Tushevev. The transaction was brokered by Sotheby's International Realty, who took a hefty $440,000 fee for the sale. The proceeds were directed towards compensating victims and resolving the significant legal problems. The sale of the multi-unit complex on Avenue Fall marked the end of Epstein's physical presence in Europe. And alright guys, that wraps up the estates of Jeffrey Epstein. This video was different than usual. What do you think about it? I thought it was super interesting. I think the estates of Jeffrey Epstein is super interesting, and we only usually hear about the island. So I really wanted to explore the ranch, the Paris apartment, and the other homes that aren't as often talked about, but equally as terrifying. So comment down below what you thought about this video. Would you like to see more Jeffrey Epstein related content in the future? And yeah, just comment down below your thoughts, because I think the Jeffrey Epstein rabbit hole is basically endless, and there is so much to expose and bring to light. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Spotify, follow me on Instagram, all that stuff, and check out some other videos on the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and this was Snook, and I'll see you next time. Bye.